Underrated moments of Ariana Grande. Wow, okay, so I know she goes up, but check this out real quick. So that's a belt, right? What she's doing there, and you can actually see a little bit of this trick here. She's tilting her head back a little bit, which actually helps facilitate what's called the cricoid tilt. So the cartilage right at the base of your Adam's apple tilts a little bit, and that shortens and thickens the folds. And that's how you belt. But here's what's really cool about this. She's going to put on a little extra spiciness. That vibrato comes from the thyroid tilt, which is more classical singing. So if I sing like opera, right? Classical singing uses the thyroid tilt. It gives you more depth of sound, and it gives you a little bit more power. So the reason why this note is super epic is because she's belting, the hardest thing to do in singing, also very loud, and then she's throwing the tilt at the end of that. Now this is smart. So oftentimes when I go into the singing subreddit, we're talking about the G5 now, every time I go to the singing subreddit, people feel really good about like, ah, on a note, like they go, ah, and they're like, yeah, I hit a high note. You want to really be able to sustain pretty much anything that you consider as part of your register, but there are moments when it's smart to just touch and leave. So that's what she's doing here. She's on this epic high note of F5. Then she has the vibrato, and then she's just going to touch the G5 and leave it. In practice, I imagine she actually can sustain a G5. Like, she's capable of doing that. But in a performance, you need to be knowledgeable enough about your own voice and how it feels and how things are going in order to be able to make smart decisions, because belting is very, very risky if done poorly. It can cause a vocal hemorrhage, which is, you know, vocal folds bleeding. There's a lot that can go badly. So it's very important to have the experience to be able to make a smart decision on your, you know, notes. That was long-winded. Anyway, let's go. D6 falsetto. Is it falsetto? Hold on, let's get another listen to that. Yeah, okay, yeah. Nice. So this is a better example of hold on. Yeah, so she's doing something that's like a lot more difficult than touching the G5, like we talked about. Right? So she's going up in between the notes, right? So this is, if you go up like, ah, you have to be pretty comfortable with the note that's higher than the one you're sustaining. Otherwise it'll be flat. And check this out, it's not flat. So that is just a little bit more, it's just a little bit harder than an F5, but not as difficult as sustaining a G5, but it's still difficult. And so it sounds impressive because it is impressive. Kudos to her. I've heard a lot of this talk about this note from her. The B flat 5 is kind of it's preposterously high. That's ridiculous. And I, again, want to convey the importance of tapping it and letting it go and that being smart. These are ridiculous high notes. And I've seen tour footage of her like basically not singing it in certain moments of the song. Which means, one, she's not lip syncing, which is always refreshing during a live performance. But two, it means that she's being very diligent with her vocal health. And that's smart. again, that vibrato on the end there is... She's been doing that. It's very... So, and not only are these notes hard by any measure, being on tour, I can't stress enough how exhausting that is. You're traveling all the time. You're never sleeping in the same place twice. And when that happens, when you're not sleeping in a space familiar to you, you actually lose a significant amount of sleep. And there's studies that prove this. So you're never sleeping in the same place twice. Maybe you're on a bus and there's a lot of noise. Maybe you're on a plane, et cetera, et cetera. It's exhausting. And when you're Ariana Grande, you are the show. So it's not like you can have an understudy. And if you cancel, everyone gets a refund, so your staff doesn't get paid. And, there's a lot of people involved in this sort of a production, right? And she's going to be on stage for maybe 2 hours. So this is very, very difficult stuff to do again and again and again. And so kudos to her, because she's doing this stuff consistently live. It's very Herculean. Let's get into this falsetto here. Ooh, let's lower that a little bit. Nice. She's being really smart with these. There we go. Right. So she's doing a bunch of these stylistic runs on the belt. And it's another way of giving yourself an out if the note isn't going well. Because when you're belting and when you're singing a high note, folds are very thick. And that can be precarious if it's not going well. So if it's not going well, it's smart to do a run out of it, because when you do a run, your folds have to be thin in order to move very quickly. And so it's a very smart way to get out of a note that maybe not is, it's like you're about to crack, or it's not comfortable and you have another hour and a half to the set. You can get out of it with a run. That's so ridiculous. I mean, that's just a silly, silly note. That's ridiculous. That's nice right here. These are really smart tricks to learn regardless of where you are in your range, but the fact that she does it is insane. And I just want to triple underline this whole tilting both cartilages at the same time, the thyroid and the cricoid. It's a little bit of a larynx gymnastics, if you will. Bringing one element in, bringing one element out. It's involved and takes a tremendous amount of practice. And actually, there's footage I've seen of Ariana in her warm-up, or in her, the backstage room that she's in, doing a lot of these runs where she practices in falsetto and then goes up. And so I want to, for anyone who wants to do this, do so gently and do so in a range where you're not jeopardizing yourself. That's how you practice this sort of stuff. That's how she practices this sort of stuff. So just throwing it out there. also, let's check out the mic technique. Belting is very, 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 very loud. It's very loud. With all of this going on, all of this audio going on, and the monitors and all that stuff, she has to be very careful. Well, the engineer has to be very careful with how hot the mic is. So she's got to get really in there probably for the rest of her vocals, but when she belts these silly, silly high notes, it's going to be loud. There's no such thing as a quiet belt. It doesn't exist. And the reason being is because your folds are so fat. In order for them to even move, you need a lot of breath pressure. And basic volume is basically it's sound pressure level. We're getting a little bit of physics here, but it's it's how much you move the air and compress it, and that's what makes the waveform. So literally, there's more breath pressure building up on a belt. If you want to be quiet, basically belting is your worst option. So what we see here are some really, really loud notes, but look at her mic technique and how she adjusts for that. Really hard to see. So notice how the mic is, ideally the mic is 1 inch from your bottom lip and pointed towards your bottom lip. But look, she brings it to the side a little bit to get it away from her mouth. So it starts very close to the mouth here. And then she moves it a lot. And mic technique is really, really, really important in pop and belting and all this sort of stuff. So when we discuss belting, it's important to, I think, there's a way that we can relate to belting from our day-to-day lives. When you go like, Mom, or when you go like, a friend across the street, hey, Tony, or whatever that is, you know what I mean? When you are basically comfortably trying to get someone's attention, it's not screaming. It's something that you try and do when, someone's far away or something, as I demonstrated. And so this B5 being held, it is sustained, but it's if you can imagine like calling your mom or calling someone across the street, you'll experience like how belting facilitates this sort of thing. It's really, it's a very unique thing about the human voice. I think it's really cool. That run is smart. So again, we can get out of very difficult situations by doing a run. And notice how the volume instantly goes away the second she starts doing a run. That's an example of thick folds turning to thin folds. Do you hear the difference in volume? And this is compressed audio, all right? Not only because it's a phone recording, but it's also been uploaded to YouTube. This audio is super compressed, which means the dynamic range, how soft it can be versus how loud it can be, is so narrowed. And even then, you can still hear that it goes from loud to quiet. See what I'm saying? So I want to just talk about this for a second here. This is something I've seen her do a lot. So up on this B flat 5, she is going to go into melisma with thin folds, then she's going to belt again, then she's going to go away from it, and then she's going to belt again. Watch this. You see how she's going, it's like quiet to loud, quiet to loud, quiet to loud. She again, this is more larynx gymnastics. She's thick, she's thin, she's thick, she's thin. And it's not arbitrary. She's making these, she's thickening the folds where the melisma would be in meter, in time, right? So if you have a meter with 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Certain beats get emphasized. And if you don't respect that, melismas can just sound like a really lazy scale, right? But because she's giving life to the downbeats, or at least the beats that she wants to emphasize, she's giving an arc to the melisma. I think that's really cool. I love her vowel choices in these runs too. So as you hit certain parts of your range, and this is true for everybody, as you hit certain parts of your range, you want to be able to manipulate the vocal tract, aka vowels. There are other ways to manipulate the vocal tract, but most people teach and learn to do that via vowels. And what the significance of that is that you can highlight frequencies by using your throat, right? So you can control volume and tone color by doing what's called vowel modifications. So listen to how she's changing her vowels in this run. Like the oo's going to make it less loud, and the e's going to bring it brighter and more forward. The e actually is the vowel that brings the most open throat. So if you look at a throat, and here's your tongue, right? An E brings the tongue like this, right? So you have more space in your throat when you're on an E vowel. And an U vowel definitely is something that, like, ooh, like when you're on an U vowel, there's less volume, less color. So before in the last run, she was using belt to give an arc to the melisma, but there are definitely other ways to do it. You can use vowels as well. And so this is really clever. Like she's not a one-trick pony. She's got tricks. She's got tricks. So, oh boy. It's interesting. You'd think that going back up to the note would be more difficult, but it's actually not. When you're belting, the trick, and this is the trick for most high notes, is you need very little air. So watch how she approaches this. So you can see her torso kind of contract a little bit. It's very hard to see in this, but you can see her torso contract after the G5. Hold on, let's get to that. So she contracts her torso after the G5. So she relaxes, then you can see her contract. Okay, so what's the significance of this? First of all, when you are tense, when you're tense and you're singing, because the entire torso affects the breath, everyone thinks like, oh, the diaphragm. Yes, the diaphragm is important, but saying diaphragmatic breathing is like saying, why don't you go and control your heartbeat? Like go make your heartbeat now and stop your heart. And you can't do those sorts of things. You can affect by proxy your heart rate, but you don't make the decision about whether your heart beats or not. For the most part. Anyway, the point I'm saying is that the diaphragm works with or without you. It has no nerve endings. You don't have a say. You don't have a lot of control over the diaphragm. So it's a bit of a misnomer to say diaphragmatic breathing. But what you do have control of is your torso. And the reasons why this is significant is that the lungs are basically a plastic bag attached to the ribcage and your torso. So any tension will be like a balloon. When you feel like touch a balloon like that, it'll expand air faster, right? So you have to have a relaxed torso if you're going up because you don't want too much air to be expended. So she relaxes and then she exhales and then goes up. And as she goes back up to it, you can tell it doesn't have as much volume as the first note, but it's actually easier to get to because she has less air than when she started. If you want to practice hitting higher notes that you're having trouble hitting, there are two tricks you can do. You can exhale before you start the note, and then you can, for when you're first learning a note and first developing a note, you can add nasality to it. Because nasality, again, this is all about breath and how little air high notes take. So the exhale helps you do that. And then if you add nasality, it allows more air to escape through the nasal passage, which allows you to hit higher notes. It doesn't sound great, and you can work towards not using nasality, but when a note is new, you can use nasality. This is uncomfortable. So she's not only in those crazy, crazy heels, she's on her knees without knee pads, and so you can see actually a contraction of the psoas. The psoas is a muscle that connects to the hips and your lower back. So she's kind of flared her lower back here. This is really hard. Like, remember when I talked about posture and not having your torso tight? Her torso is tight here. It has to, because she doesn't have any support. Like, her knees are on the ground, sure, but her feet and her shins are not touching the ground because she's in this. So she's really having to balance. And she can still do this. That's tough. She did that even after fixing her earpiece. This is experience. This is performance experience right here. So it's before that. So you can see it. You can see it. It's loose. So she fixes it. And she doesn't lose herself. She's still singing and she's like, yeah. That's someone who's had to fix the earpiece many a time live, right? Let's talk about this. It is very tempting as a singer when you're singing a high note to really make your mouth like wide and open. But if you do that, it tends to sound very strident and unpleasant. So watch how little she has to open her mouth here. That matters a lot because you can maintain a lot more power if your mouth is not as wide open. So just a cool little detail there. I really respect whoever she's hired to do all these different sets, like all the dancers and all. This is like really involved. Probably the hardest part about being a pop musician is that you have to give an incredible show for many, many hours. And yes, she's practiced it to death, I'm sure. But you're having to do all of these high notes. If you're someone who's known as a singer's singer, you have to be vocally impressive, but you can't just stand there and sing anymore. Like, cannot happen. So she is in heels, she is walking around, she's messing with her earpiece, she's got different stage atmospheres depending on the tour, she's got dancers she's got to work with. So to be able to do all this stuff while all that's going on, it adds an extra layer of difficulty, right? She's not in the practice room, she's on stage performing. You need a lot of comfort and a lot of experience. part of me is upset that we're not tucking in our shirts in a tux and we don't have cummerbunds. I don't know how sharp that was. I don't think that was sharp. One second. Yeah, I don't think that was sharp. I mean, it maybe was sharp by like a cent or two. A cent is 100th of a half step, but if it was sharp, it was not by much. So this had to be practiced a ton. Look at this. Speaking of performing and hitting high notes, look at... Now, credit to her and the guy who's carrying her. Look at how she waits until she's in a comfortable position to hit that high note. Right? I mean, that's silly. That's really hard. So again, this is more of that, like, being able to tilt and untilt your cricoid cartilage takes a lot of experience and a lot of strength. There are muscles that are responsible for tilting, right? So when you tilt, it usually, especially on a higher note, it's very difficult to have that strength to get the tilt to where it needs to be in the first place, let alone to be able to do, you know, like this very quickly. So, and again, we've shown this before, but I want to emphasize it again. Listen to when the tilt happens versus when she's in a melisma. And you hear how that tilt comes back in. It's really tough to hit the tilt you need to be at just on these stupid high notes. But then to be able to come in and out of it, that's ludicrous. Exit stage. I really hope her live sets are not like all of this all of the time, because I don't care who you are. This is very tiring. I don't know what's more impressive, the B-flat 5 or the screaming fan who probably lost their voice after this show. Just keep breathing, breathing, breathing. I wouldn't call that sustained. If it's just like, and I guess maybe it's you know, we're getting into maybe things that are like pedantic, but when I think sustained, I'm thinking like a couple of beats in the measure at least, let alone like maybe even more than one measure. And again, I'm not saying that this note is not impressive. The reason why I bring it up is because I don't want anybody at home getting to these higher notes of their range thinking that they need to sustain them. When you're this ridiculous of a range, you're singing a ridiculous high note, it's not a good idea to sustain it. This is so high. Just keep breathing, breathing, breathing. This is a great way to get off of a note and tie it into a phrase. sliding in between notes is a really good way to not only have an easier time hitting the note, but having an easier time getting away from it. And it's also musical, right? It makes for a line, a vocal line, a melodic line that's a lot more smooth. This is beautiful, I agree. And this is something I've seen her practice a lot, is this this oo vowel. Oo vowels, for some reason, not only facilitate the thyroid tilt if you're trying to learn how to do that. Oo vowels are great. But they're wonderful in falsetto because they kind of agree with falsetto, right? Falsetto is very light, very delicate. And so is an oo vowel. So if you put the two together, you get a really nice, beautiful, vulnerable aesthetic, which was done here successfully. So low notes, so in genres where you don't have the ability to be heard without a microphone, like if I sang, I would never be heard without a microphone. But the other thing is that it would sound, even with compression, even with tons of compressions, even with a condenser microphone and a compressor, the volume difference between this and that is a lot. It's a lot. So there's ways to combat that when you have a microphone. That's like this. She's right on the microphone, which gives the proximity effect, which lowers the lower, or boosts the lower frequencies. Right, you can even hear it if I'm here, and then I go away, and then I go away, and then I come back, and I come back, and you can hear it. Right? So getting close to the mic helps. Keeping loose lips also helps. So if I'm doing this, and then I like, you can hear the change. So the rounding of the lips will also increase the volume of lower frequencies, because it's literally making your vocal tract longer. As much as this is a compilation of impressive vocal feats, I just want to give her credit as an artist. These are not just random high notes. They're sung with a lot of conviction, and particularly this phrase I think is really lovely. Yeah, I mean, we can't forget that artistry, I think, should precede high notes. And the difficulty and the magic is when both of those combine, right? Vapid high notes out of context, no one really cares about. And then there's also something to be said about holes in your range. I have seen performances of, and there's a particular performer that comes to mind I won't name. This individual had very, 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 very high notes, but had a hole in their range, particularly around this area. And as cool as the high notes were, the whole performance kind of got ruined when they struggled on a phrase where that sat around this. And it was really awkward and uncomfortable to sit through. So you can't just have high notes. You have to have the ability to sing through the entirety of your range. And there are a lot of people, not overwhelmingly, but there are a lot of people who will just hit high notes, and they're cool with that, and they get some money for it because literally they can sing the money notes, but no one ever really goes and sees them like a second time, or they're put in the chorus, or they're put in a like a secondary role, because they don't have the ability to sing evenly throughout their range. So that's a big thing. Did she bump into Whizzle right there? Or was that a fan? Yeah, it was a fan. And again, I really like the conviction of this phrase. It probably ends on a high note, but just listen to how lovely her voice is, like how pretty her voice is, and how she's singing with a lot of conviction. Like, her voice is actually just pretty. And that you're born with. You can learn a lot of stuff. And technique can help you certainly achieve a more beautiful aesthetic. But to a certain degree, tone is something you're born with. Because it has to do with, you know, all of your anatomy, right? I think Ariana Grande is going to hit a certain level of status a couple of years down the line from now, because she's so young and so talented. But I think anytime like someone new hits the scene, you get the curmudgeon and the gatekeepers like a little upset. But she's undeniably talented. So I think in a couple of years, she'll get the recognition for that quite frankly, I think she deserves right now. But just watching the patterns of, you know, singers coming and going, and the ones that stay and the ones that get respect, I think she'll hit that level of like icon that it will earn her a lot more ubiquitous respect. She is one of the best-selling artists right now, but I think even the gatekeepers will have to acknowledge her in a couple of years. I don't think there's any other option. That's impressive. Let's talk about this. So not only is that sustained, F sharp 5, but it's beautifully phrased. This again goes back to it's not enough to have good high notes. The other thing too is you can see, because she's tilting her head back, you can actually see the tilting happen. So watch how you don't see anything here. And then you see how this V comes in. I'm going to maximize the video because it's very hard to see. Give me one moment here. Okay. So look at this. Very, very relaxed, very loose. And then that V is the sternocleidomastoids being affected by the cricoid tilt. I'm still learning to tilt here. There we go. So you get this, because the cricoid is kind of at the base of the neck here. So you can actually see it happening. Now, I don't advise practicing visually, right? I don't advise you to go into a mirror and practice that. But it's just cool, you can see the mechanics in action. And this really helps, this backwards head tilt. You can see how this leg loosens up immediately afterwards. I think it's really cool. Anyway. That hurt my ears. It's funny, like, you know, I know people go to live performances and record everything on their phone, and I get it. It's very exciting. You want a memory of it. But man, it would be nice if like official audio was released for these things and they were allowed to let fans use the footage there. But anyway. Now watch how she recovers there, because this is actually a little flat, which is fine. The world's most famous violinist, or the legend that is Heifetz, in an interview, he was asked, "How are you so in tune? You never go flat." And he's like, "That's not true. I go flat. I'm just very good at fixing it." So, and you have to be able to account for these things that will happen, because she's a human being, because we're all human beings. You're going to make mistakes. Watch how she fixes it. This is important. So she doesn't stay on it, which is smart. A lot of people, when they go flatter, it's uncomfortable. They're like, no, I'm going to make this work. And it just tends not to work. So instead, she starts a melisma and goes up. And that helps her a lot to kind of make this almost an imperceptible mistake. Again, we all make them. It's just how she gets out of it that makes her very, very good at what she does. And I think most people would never hear that as flat. That's not that flat. It's exacerbated by the quality of the recording. When you are live and you hear this, it would not sound flat to you at all. But on these lower quality audio recordings, it sounds much more flat than it actually is. This is 1 or 2 cents flat, as in it is flat by 1/100th of a half step. So it's fine, but she's still correcting it. It's really cool. I love that sort of a thing. This is a great way to practice higher notes if you're learning them. Again, we talked about exhaling. We talked about adding nasality. But another way you can start expanding your range is to do stuff like this. Right? Where you're, right? It's a nice way to kind of learn how to get to that without having to sustain it, it's less exhausting, and it's a little safer to do. And these exercises, like, I know people always want to hit the high note. They want to hit the high note, and I get it. But if you practice smart, then you can have these abilities to adjust live when things aren't going well, right? So you might be stubborn to say, oh, I'm going to hit that high note. I'm going to learn to hit the high note. I'm not going to compromise. But that's not smart. It really, you should be smart about it, because we've seen again and again and again how she's making adjustments in the same song through different performances depending on where she's at vocally. So you need to practice intelligently and get yourself more comfortable in your high range by practicing smarter, not harder, right? Her belts are so powerful. You can hear it. I wish we had a spectral analyzer. Belting is loud because it tends to be very, very hot in a certain frequency range. Unlike the thyroid tilt. The thyroid tilt kind of increases the volume in general throughout the frequency range, but when you belt, you're generally doing so with a high larynx. I'm not sure if you can actually have a low larynx as you belt. I don't see why you wouldn't be able to, but oftentimes people have a higher larynx when they belt. And then they retract their false folds up here. So when you have this sort of a situation, it's deceptive because there's so much compression on the microphone, but this is so powerful. You can kind of hear it. It's very hard to hear, but if you know what you're looking for and you know what you're listening for, you can hear how there's this this like little like frequency that's just kind of ringing out. That's very idiomatic of belting. She was having a good night then, clearly. So this is why practicing your falsetto is very important. But I also think this is something she gets crud for, and a lot of singers get crud for when they're doing runs, is this little jaw movement. But the jaw movement actually helps, like we discussed before, where runs have to be in meter and should be in meter. When you can like do that quick motion with your jaw, you actually give a lot of emphasis. I can't do it with my jaw, but if I did, right, any sort of movement like that will give a little bit of emphasis to the note. And so she's doing that on purpose, very much so. And it gives, again, more of an arc to the phrase. You can see her in some again, the backstage footage that you can see sometimes. You can see her doing this practice. And one of the smarter things that I saw that she did when she was practicing this sort of a thing was she would start high, whatever, you know, ooh on falsetto down to maybe the octave down, and then slide up into a belt. And that might actually sound difficult, but it's actually easier to belt in that way because, again, you need less air, right? So if you are in falsetto, your folds are flipped open. There's a lot of air leaking out, which gives it the flute-like quality that it has. And because so much air is being expended, you can go up with less air, right? Which makes the high note easier. So this is a good way to practice, is to do a scale down, like, and then belt up there. So start with falsetto, right? And then slide your way up to the belt and probably add a little bit nasality. Again, don't ever practice something as risky as belting on notes that you're very uncomfortable with. I'm talking about, like, you shouldn't feel a tickle. Like, you should feel completely comfortable, and if you don't, probably take it down a little bit. Because what you're trying to do is you're not trying to hit the note in a practice session. You're trying to develop the coordination that you need, which takes time, right? So aim when you practice to build a coordination. Understand that you need less air. Understand that there's a tilt that you need to get to. And by the way, you can practice that tilt silently. If you imagine yourself yelling across the road, yelling across the street of a busy traffic, and you don't actually make the sound, but you visualize the sound, you know, you physicalize it. That's a terrible word, but you put yourself through the physical situation mentally. You don't actually make the sound. You'll start to be able to isolate the cricoid tilt. So this is, again, this is how to practice smart. Silently try to find the tilt, because until you find the tilt, you're not going to belt, right? So silently practice to find the tilt. Give yourself situations where you don't have enough air, falsetto down, exhale, right? And then add a little nasality just to start, like a ha, little French vowel is a great one because it's so nasal. And then you can, when you're learning to sustain the note and you feel comfortable, you can ha, yeah, so you can belt on any vowel, right? But that ha really helps to start. So she does all this stuff. She takes all the tricks from her practice session and she makes them into music. And it's, you know, this is someone who's been singing for years and years and years. So don't skip the steps, because if you do, you will not be able to sing so comfortably in a variety of ways and of different approaches. I thought she was on The Voice just this season. I didn't realize she was on it before. This is something I'm curious about, is tongue position. I think she has her tongue up like this, which can change the sound. That's what I'm seeing here. So if I go, and I kind of tilt the tongue upwards, it can get some weird effects here. So I'm not sure if that's what she's doing. It looks like that's what she's doing. This is another thing that people don't get credit for. So everyone always freaks out over belts, and I get it. It's definitely the most difficult thing to do in all of singing, particularly to do it well and safely. But great singers know how to do both. They know how to do the classical tilt as well. So they're not just comfortable belting, they're comfortable singing with like this more classical thyroid tilt thing, which warms up the sound and sounds pretty. And Beyonce has songs where that's all she does, right? It's be a sponge when you're learning. Don't say, oh, I don't want to sing classical. I don't want to sing opera, so I don't want to learn the thyroid tilt. She's not singing opera, but she can thyroid tilt. And that gives it that lush, warm tone whenever you use the thyroid tilt. She can switch in between the two very comfortably. Right? That belt up on the top, very light belt. Then she goes for the thyroid tilt, she goes close up to the microphone, and then she rounds out her lips, giving her this dynamic contrast, this bright versus dark, in one single phrase. It's technique being used to create art, which should first and foremost be the goal, right? Also, thyroid tilting is easier and safer than belting. So if you can't do either, probably a good idea to start with the thyroid tilt. You can do that by whimpering a little bit and don't reach for it. Go, Or you do a little like baby talk, like, who's your booger doogers? Who's your booger doogers? That will train tilting. Same with oo vowels. So if you oo vowel scale like, ooh, like if you do that sort of a thing, you'll feel the thyroid. It takes a little bit to get used to. Just, you know, it's not something we do every day. But it warms up the sound. It's something that you should be able to do. And when you can do it, you get to do really cool things like this. That vibrato, anytime you hear vibrato, the thyroid cartilage is tilted. So if you hear it on a belt, then both cartilages are being tilted, right? So just to triple underline, don't say no to different techniques. In the same way that classical singers should probably learn to belt. Just because it sounds cool. And we love this. This is everywhere in musical theater. She's belting. She's belting with the straight tone. Now she's going to add the thyroid tilt to this. And it gives her this warm tone that she just doesn't achieve when she's belting. So both are important. Anyway, this is a marvelous video. Thank you for sending it to me, the people who did. If you like this kind of video, check out the live streams. I got it right, finally. The live streams right over there, either one of the two. Pick whatever one interests you. That's where I let viewers decide what we're reacting to, what we're talking about. So if that interests you, go ahead and check those out.